So, hello everyone, and welcome to StoryMoss. I'm Megan Lindo here with Emmanuel Ashisha, and we are delighted to be joined by Juan Garcia Martinez. We are here in advance of the World Adaptation Forum taking place in beautiful Budapest and online on the 23rd and 24th of April. And Juan is coming, he's the research manager for an organization called ALLFED, which I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself in a moment as you wish. But just to say, this is the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters. So we, this forum is going to be a really special gathering of hearts and minds to look at deep adaptation inspired from Jen Bendel's work and many others, and really coming together to look at all of these scenarios of collapse and disaster and finding our way through, seeing how we can bring different hearts and minds together. So this is looking at an issue that's been on many of our minds lately is the food system. And yeah, so so much fragility and so much potential as well that we're going to speak with Juan about. So welcome, Juan. We're delighted to be here with you. And please, would you introduce yourself and tell us what particularly inspires you to come to this forum now?
Of course, thank you for having me. Yes, so I'm a chemical engineer from Spain, but I've been doing research on all these topics. I've been working on food system research for nearly 8 years now at ALLFED and other organizations. And I'm particularly excited to go to the World Adaptation Forum because I'm interested to meet people from other communities I don't normally interact with as much. And who have been thinking about all of these things about like how can we adapt to collapses, to catastrophes, to all these things that could happen in a bit of a different way that me and my coworkers have been thinking about and seeing like what are some ways we could synergize, what are like of the things we agree on, what can we work together on, right? So that's what I'm excited about. And I would say to really boil down things to the simplest, there are maybe three takeaways I want people to get from interacting with me on the forum. Um, the first I would say is that, well, first let me say the organization's mission and the reason for me being here is that we want to help build resilience against a global catastrophic food system failure. And we can talk more about what that means. It's a pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's the idea of losing 5, 10% or more of global food production, something that's fairly unprecedented in recent history, possibly hasn't happened in 60 to 200 years, depending how you look at it. So what can we do about this? Going back to those three key takeaways, I think the first one is that there are multiple underappreciated risks to the food system that could potentially lead to a global failure. And I could start listing things. Some of the things we are really concerned about include things like a volcanic climate changing eruption, a nuclear war or other type of large-scale conflict, a pandemic more severe than COVID, an abrupt change to the climate, or various other reasons. And all of this could cause a food supply loss of up to 48% if infrastructure collapses. So that's about half of the global food loss if infrastructure completely collapses. And up to 90% loss of all global food production if there's a reduction in sunlight, which could be caused by the volcanoes or the nuclear war. So these are the worst case scenarios, and we're working on how can we address them.
Yeah.
That's the first takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. And because, it strikes me that as a kind of global society, we've had a number of different, what one might call dress rehearsals. We had a global pandemic. We have had, scenarios of warfare, for example, of the Ukraine, such a heavy producer of grain. And, we've had volcanic eruptions. We've had, how, um, how have you learned through these kinds of, things that do kind of spur the thinking about what can happen. And
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. We pay a lot of attention to what is going on in the world, what has happened recently, and what has happened in the past. Historical precedents are fundamental to our work. So these modern ones that you're bringing up clearly show, give us an idea of the fragility and interconnectedness of food systems that are fundamental dynamics to what could happen and what's the worst that could happen with it. We have learned from Ukraine that you could very quickly, from a loss of trade, cause massive damage, but it can also be quickly reversed if people rise up to the challenge in diplomacy and everything else, and like get together to release that wheat to people who would otherwise enter severe food insecurity. From COVID, we've learned things like, similarly, it could be terrible if people do the worst and like egocentrically decide like I'm going to create trade restrictions to keep my people fed, but that means that you're going to make other people starve around the world. But if everyone keeps it open, everyone stays fed. So it's very important that, again, the politicians raise up to the challenge in the diplomacy and everything and prevent the worst things like food trade restrictions being put in place, fertilizer restrictions being put in place and all that. Other historical precedents you might be interested to hear about, that we think about a lot more, is like, where are the times in history when we've had much worse happen? Because, COVID and Ukraine could have been much worse, but the worst was averted. But throughout history, we've had things like, World War II caused massive disruptions to food systems, to agricultural inputs, that it made people end up going hungry. There was a certain, like a shock of like, hard to estimate, but maybe 5-10% of global food production. It was massive. And that did affect people's lives. But the worst that has happened in like modern history in like the last 200 years was the year without summer. And if you know, for those who haven't heard of this before, that's worth saying. There was a volcano in Indonesia that emitted so much material to the atmosphere that it kind of obstructed sunlight from hitting the crops, from reaching the surface of the earth. And that caused problems all around the world. In one place in the world, in Indonesia, you go to the other side of the world, in North America, South America, people were having malnutrition and famine over there 200 years ago because of that. And it can happen again. These are the kind of ways we think about historical precedents.
yeah.
Thank you, Juan. Megan, can I jump in with the sun question that I had? Like, can you spend more time thinking about, how can we protect? The sun is very generous and will keep on shining every day, but how can we protect our sun supply that we use so much for our food production? How are we changing our food production? How maybe it's becoming more local, and also the water. So sun and water, and maybe the new food production that your team is working on, and the old one like fermentation, or anyway.
So if I understand, then the question is, what can we do when something like that happens? Right? Okay. So one thing that me and my team are very insistent about is what we need as a society and as a country or as a community or as a group of people. We need a portfolio of solutions that are robust to many of these risks, some of which I've mentioned. We need a group of things that like we can pick and choose from, so that when something bad happens, we are ready to go, we have the solution ready, and we can just immediately implement it. So it's very important to have a clear set of things that you can choose from to use the right one. And that includes things like, for example, low-tech interventions, things that are like simple adaptations that don't require a lot of infrastructure, because you don't have lots of infrastructure everywhere in the world, right? You want everyone to be able to feed themselves. So that means things like you could relocate crops around the world if you have the option, like if the climate changes because there's less sun or because of other reasons, then the crops that will be better to keep yourself and your family fed are going to change as well. So maybe you need to use a different variety of wheat. Or for more serious changes, maybe instead of growing corn, you need to start growing wheat or like canola oil. That's like, for example, better suited for cold climates. So you can move seeds around. You can try to get more out of your land. You can try to use land you wouldn't normally use if there's a crisis.
Yeah.
There are many different ways. You can try to, you can redirect food away from uses that are not food. As you know, like only about half of food, only about half of land is actually used for food for people. A lot of the food that we produce is now being spent as feed and as biofuels. So if we could redirect as much food as we can away from use as animal feed and as biofuels, that'll be a massive source of food. That's one of the biggest, most important things you can do in any food catastrophe. And the faster you do it, the more lives you would save.
And at the same time, so much waste of food happening.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I was just going to say that 30% of our food is wasted. But in time of catastrophe, this food may not even be grown anyway. So this, it would be good for a year or two that we didn't waste the food and we fermented the food so we have it. But if we can't grow the food anymore, and also, and so that was funny, Megan. We talked about it at the same time. But also, what about education? Like we don't even know how to grow our food. So like the population needs to also really get more aware, of how to supply and how to grow.
Yeah, waste and education are fundamental things, like both very huge topics. I can say a quick thing about them. Like there are many different reasons why you want to reduce food waste before and during a catastrophe. Before, because it's just more efficient, and during, because it's life-saving. And there are many different ways you can do that. Like you can improve the infrastructure. Like in poor countries, the problem is they don't have enough infrastructure. And then the food spoils. In rich countries, the issue is that people have more food than they need, and they end up going to waste at the household level. So there are things that you can do about that. We can talk more about that later. The other thing you brought up is education. Indeed, education is fundamental. You want to have a portfolio of solutions, like I was saying. Some of those will involve large centralized production, as most of the food system is. Some of those will involve things like, what if I need to start growing my own food at the community level or at the household level? How can I do that? We need open source resources on how to do that efficiently and how to do that in less than ideal conditions as we could have in a catastrophe.
Yes. I wanted to ask you, because as you've been speaking, I wanted to ask you about open source and, sort of a deeper question behind that as well, which has more to do with the different scenarios of cooperation and collaboration and coordination that may exist, across the scales of global and local as catastrophes hit. I mean, I'm thinking of, being in Africa, where conflict is such a driver of food catastrophe, where people are actively blocked from, populations are actively starved as a strategy of warfare. And, so if you have something to say just about addressing those different scenarios and levels of how the response, what the possibilities might be for response and coordination in different scenarios.
Yes. I could spend hours talking about this. I'll try to be brief. So I keep coming back to this idea of we need a portfolio of interventions, of solutions. So what me and my team do is not only do we talk to governments and people who have a lot of capacity to affect on things, to tell them oh, you need to implement this on your plans, or you need to invest in this, and control centralized production such that people having a food to eat. But we also do a lot of, all our research is open, but we also are very big fans of decentralized solutions and open source solutions. And we think both of these centralized and decentralized solutions are part of the puzzle to maximize the chances of everyone to stay fed and stay alive and in good health. So some of the decentralized solutions that we look at could involve like, instructions to help people grow their food better given a change in the climate. Or, for example, I can give you a very pointed example. Right now, in Cuba, they're having a terrible situation because they are running out of energy and fuel, especially liquid fuel. It's really terrible. It's a serious humanitarian situation they have right now. And right now, the UN is starting to mobilize to send them like solar panels and the stuff that they need to keep irrigation going and food, transport, water, all the things that people need to survive. Well, we study something that could help them. For example, we study gasification technologies where you can retrofit a car to, instead of running on liquid fuels that depend on fragile supply chains that your adversaries can affect, you can also use local resources through simple technologies to retrofit the car and use instead some kind of biomass or coal or some plant or something, and it can run on that. And then you can still distribute food, and you can still have tractors in the field. You can do all the things that you need to keep your population fed. And so we do like open source designs for gasifiers and models that show their usefulness. And like, we also look at like, what if we had to go even one step further and use animals or something? Like, there are many different ways to go about this.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'd love to ask you just to sort of highlight a couple of examples, if you could, of things that are really innovative and surprising that have come out of, of looking into the different possibilities with, mushrooms and single-celled organisms and, and thinking about producing food under these drastic conditions where food production happens in a way that most of us don't think of at all as being food production.
Yeah, very happy to. So I'll tell you about some of my favorites. I am a chemical engineer, first and foremost. I look at a lot of fermentation technologies and what we call fermentation on large scale, which is like large vessels. Imagine like a brewery, but instead of making beer, you're making like protein or something like that, right? So that's probably my favorite, but that's what we call single-cell proteins, or protein from single-cell organisms, where you can feed the microorganisms something that doesn't depend on stable agricultural conditions, right? Your sugar supply or your supply of corn or whatever can be disrupted. What if we instead fed them with CO2 that we're taking directly from the air, or from natural gas or biogas that's produced in a sustainable way? Or we could use, some other resource. Like, there are many ways that you could feed these organisms in ways that basically just help you have more food when you need it, and are basically immune to disruptions to the climate, that allow you to have massive production plants to feed people that are missing protein or any other like vitamins, essential minerals that they need. So it can be used for food aid, for local production. So it's kind of fascinating. Like, if you think about it, it's almost like alchemy. We can take something inanimate like CO2 from the air or a biogas or natural gas, and the microorganisms will turn that into food for people. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
I love that because I think, sorry to interrupt you, Juan, but I love that because at the same time that we're helping engage more people in the buying tickets online and attending the World Adaptation Forum, Megan and I and StoryMoss are also working on helping the global Earth repair convergence that's happening in May, a few weeks after Budapest, and also online, use a lot of permaculture and social permaculture. But permaculture, we're both designers and we're starting our practice actually, but also to, the nature-based solution. Like, we have a master list for our content from the host of the Convergence, Michael Pilarski, who has been at it for 50 years. So he has 130 points that are very simple solution that nature had for us the whole time. Some of us knew about it, and some of us totally never paid any attention and forgot because we took a different route. And now, so it's like we're talking about Earth repair. ALLFED is talking about Earth repair in terms in terms of a catastrophe, but it's going back to listening to what nature has for us again and trying different ways. Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these microorganisms are in nature just waiting to be discovered or used for food or other ways.
Mm.
If you want, I can give you a couple more examples of like
Yes.
interesting solutions. We talk a
Fascinating.
lot about things like seaweed, because seaweed is such an incredibly resilient crop that's really underutilized globally, except in certain
I go
places in Southeast
foraging
Asia.
for seaweed here in Cape Town.
Nice, nice. Beautiful. Yeah, so we've actually found surprisingly in our research that seaweed is so resilient to like it almost doesn't matter where you throw at it, it will just keep going. And you can, if you grow the right ones and if you treat them right after harvesting, they can give you so much food so fast, it's almost unbelievable. We think we could grow food for like, I don't know, we could grow the equivalent of 30% of global food if we got serious within a year. Like we could just get so much, like we could get more seaweed than people can eat. It's truly crazy.
Juan, kelp is in the same family, right? Kelp farming.
Kelp is one of the most common ones, yes. There's lots of different ones that grow well under different
kelp
conditions.
is a seaweed. Yeah, kelp is a seaweed.
Yes, yes, exactly. Like kelp, the nori seaweed that people put on their sushi and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
We just have to grow a test. I love seaweed. Some people don't like seaweed at all. But I'm sure we could make cheese with seaweed, or we could make bread or flour or cake or anything could be made of anything, right? And so what about mushrooms? Megan was asking. Oh, anyway, if you want to talk about mushrooms.
No, that makes sense. So mushrooms is a fascinating one. It's actually mushrooms and the resilient qualities that inspired my boss, David, to start ALLFED back in 2017. He read an academic scientific article about like how even in a volcanic winter or something like that, mushrooms would still grow. And the author said something about how mushrooms would dominate the planet. And he immediately thought like, wow, what if we, instead of going extinct, we just ate the mushrooms and survived, right? So really it's the resilience of mushrooms that in a way inspired our organization to arise.
But also mushroom likes to grow they don't need that much sun, right?
Precisely, and that's why they would be such good survivors in this kind of scenario. They just grow on biomass of trees and whatever.
And they multiply themselves without even, I know. And they also, what's fascinating, I was thinking about that, reading about your work, is that mushroom can feed us, but mushroom can heal. I mean, heal as plant, but also as after wildfires in California, there were a lot of mushroom being dispersed in the forest to take care of the soil and heal it in a faster way.
Bioremediation.
So that's amazing, the power of mushroom. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, indeed.
So it sort of opens up a new window of just into the abundance and resilience and all of the different sources of life that can potentially feed us with when we open our minds to the possibilities.
But what about water? I mean, we're spending a lot of time on rehydration and the water element of permaculture, or StoryMoss is often in a water story. What we do to grow our food if water is not as available, for instance? Do you have a...
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people are thinking about it. I'm probably not the best one to answer because it's not my topic of research. What I can say is what we've done in terms of how can we make sure that people stay hydrated even in the worst case scenarios, for example. Because we've run some models on like, okay, if there was a global or regional collapse of infrastructure, including water infrastructure, how can we ensure that people have enough? So we've run some models on like, how far could people go by themselves? Like, could they use bikes or whatever they have around, or walk to nearby sources if the tap stop like sending water? And we found that in many places in the world you could. In other ones, not so much. Other places, if they didn't have enough water, would need to relocate quite fast because I mean, after all, we can only survive a couple of days without water, like maybe 3 days, if we're actually moving around. But yeah, so we've started like, how can we use human-powered vehicles like bikes to keep people with that? Because, you know, ideally, countries should have things like, oh, I'll have the army or whoever sending through resources.
Yeah.
But if the infrastructure is also not working, that can be hard. So, you know, we gotta be, you know what they say, like, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So.
Yeah, hacked hope.
Yes.
But water to drink, but what about water to grow food? Like,
Yeah,
are
so
you
that's
working on food that doesn't require as much water?
that's the part I'm not as much I don't
Okay.
know as much about. It's not my specialty. But for example, my colleagues are looking at models of irrigation where, like, you know, in these like winter scenarios, like from the volcanic winter or nuclear winter, if something like that happened, we would have much less precipitation. How could we deal with that? They're studying like, okay, could we temporarily tap into like deeper aquifers to like just for a few years get enough water before the system stabilizes again and things like that. So there's a lot of work to be done on that to understand. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to the water crisis going on right now.
Harvesting. But
we actually experienced this in Cape Town several years ago. In 2018, we got very close to what they said day zero, where the reservoirs were all virtually empty. And it was very fortunate that there was a good rainy season that winter. Otherwise, but we were confronting those scenarios in a very real way. So I think, So I think this is a good note to end on. Emmanuel, would you like to close us?
Oh, well, no, I'm just very happy. I love, as you say, we could go on for a few hours.
Yes.
Maybe we should actually, or not a few hours, but because we are also developing a longer podcast, we're starting on podcasts, so it'd be fun to do a piece on you, with you, if you'd like, as our first inaugural longer piece. Because usually we do like a 10-minute podcast, but now we're thinking maybe half an hour. But so, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And people are going to be very lucky to meet you in Budapest and vice versa. We can't wait to be with you there one year.
Thank you. So you will be there too?
No, I'm in New York. I'm trying to. I was thinking, I was like, I must try away. If anyway, let's see. Perhaps. Megan is in Cape Town, so it's a bit further away this time. But we're happy to be a little bit with the team at the World Adaptation Forum. We're also going to, I think, maybe continue to weave with StoryWeave. This is like a weaving salon that we've started during the forum, So during the year, there can be more back and forth exchange conversation with the amazing speakers now that the team has lined up over 3 years. We're about to speak with Jem Bandel, who was very much instrumental in the beginning of that. So it's really exciting. So thank you so much for taking the time today. And do you have a few words before we are cut in 1 minute to close, if you'd like?
Sure. I guess I'll just say I encourage anyone with the capacity to reach people in government to tell them you should be putting institutional plans for resilience in place. You should be setting up task forces. You should be implementing these things on your risk registers. We need to develop these technologies more when they need investment. So anyone who can reach governments, go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan. It's been great speaking with you and fascinating to hear about all of your work, and really look forward to continuing the conversation with you, and wishing you a wonderful time at the World Adaptation Forum in Budapest. And we will be there online and in spirit. So
otherwise, I'll be looking for you if I make it.
Very good. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
A lovely weekend.
Thank you.